Hi, everyone. This is Randy Kim from the Banh Mi Chronicles podcast. And this is another emergency edition of the podcast. And so there is a trigger warning. The trigger will be conversations surrounding ICE raids, deportations, and detainment. And I am here with Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez. Many thanks to your wife, Lorene, who's also been a dear friend of mine for bringing you on at the last minute. And I know that you've been extremely busy with everything that's been going on with the ICE raids. You currently serve as the alderman or the Chicago City Council in the 25th Ward. And Byron, thank you so much for being on my show. And let me ask you, how have you been navigating the last few days? I mean, I think this is a very loaded question, but I think just in general, like how have you been able to try to manage the day-to-day unpredictability from you and that's going on, and how are you and the staff working to navigate through this together?
Yeah, no, thank you again, Randy, for the invitation. And it's been a very difficult time in our community, as you know. We have been leaning on one another during these very dark times that we live in. So, surrounded by community, surrounded by um, the, the beautiful city that we have around us. And I'm very grateful for all the rapid responders, all the volunteers, all the people of Chicago who are standing up to fascism, that is standing up to racial profiling, the dehumanization and the criminalization of immigrants, trans communities, black, brown, and poor people in general. This is an attack on the
Mhm.
poor. This is an attack on working people. And the focus on cities like Chicago and others because of our diversity or strength or strength as a city that takes pride of having 77 neighborhoods with people all over the world, Palestinian, Jewish, black, brown, Asians, and old, young, all of us fighting back against this regime. So it's being a very difficult time, as you would imagine, when we see families tear apart. We
Mhm.
having to go to find people that we still have people who we still haven't been able to communicate in days. Families who are desperately trying to reach their loved ones, not even attorneys, to figure out the chaos that the Trump administration is provoking in our cities on purpose to distract us from the serious crimes happening every day in our country and using us as scapegoats, as pawns, and now literally chasing us in our neighborhoods as not even as human beings, right?
Mhm.
So I think that this is the moment where we lean on each other, that we build coalition. So I've been very, despite of the dark times that we live in, and the
Mhm.
profound pain that our community is suffering from small businesses, schools, churches, hospitals. You saw just of this last weekend that we saw the unleash of terror in Rogers Park when they were targeting churches. They tear gas against the ruling of federal judges. They are defying rule orders of federal judges, and they are intimidating judges that have ruled, with the law, like the Oregon and Portland. And we're not talking enough about these things when they burn a
Mhm.
house on fire to
Mhm.
intimidate a judge that have clearly said what is everybody knows is happening. We have a president who is unhinged, who is using
Mhm.
the military as his personal militia to unleash it against black and brown communities. And
Mhm.
the profound pain that means, and the danger. They're already evoking the Insurrection Act. They already seem to be want to push towards martial law and chaos. What's gonna be the case when they start defying and disrespecting the 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 rule of law, when the courts are deciding do not use tear gas and they still do it for
Mhm.
everybody to see. And again, I think it's very important that in this moment we understand why Chicago is holding the line. They're trying to fabricate all this violence. They killed one of our neighbors, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez. They shot a woman that was basically found herself in a bad situation with these masked individuals trying to leave us, and then they shot at her. That's what created the unrest in Brighton Park. And when we went there to, of course, help our neighbors, we all were tear gas, including the Chicago Police Department. They have no, they have
Mhm.
no respect for. And this I'm telling you, the dehumanization, this narrative, anti-immigrant narrative that is putting immigrants worse than pedophiles. That's exactly where we are in our country. And I think that we need to, in this moment, understand that this can be the trans community next we saw in South Shore. You see how traffic is stopping the west side of Chicago, ended up with someone on the floor being choked. And then we see the raids at, like
Hmm.
we're back in the Nazi Germany in
Hmm.
South Shore, when we have an slumlord that literally put the taxing each door of immigrants that were behind rents with the number of kids. And then we have like the terror that was unleashed with kids in C blocks, families outside naked, black and brown communities, and with no evidence. I'm yet to see a single gun that was recovered from there. Meantime, we
Hmm.
have mass shootings all over the country. We have massive unrest and the criminalization of dissent, which is what we saw in Broadview, when people being arrested, dozens of people being arrested, not only by the federal government, but the state police as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
So in all of this, it's very important to to really thank Chicagoans in this moment in history for standing up for each other. And I think that I've seen the tremendous support in all of this that I'm describing to you,
Hmm.
and all the heaviness, what you see, like tear gas, like they're trying to turn our neighborhoods into war zones because
Hmm.
they do not see us as human beings. And in this
Hmm.
moment, it is great to see people all over the community, building strong coalitions, how we can get involved in each block at
Hmm.
the neighborhood level to respond, to care for your neighbors, to see who is there. There's initiatives already about like reclaiming your corner store, reclaiming your corner, your block, making sure that you connect with people. So in this moment, as it's very heavy and very dark, we also see a little bit of light in Chicago, and Chicagoans and Illinoisans fighting back so that they don't take us back to the times of the civil wars, when people were being lynched, when people were snatched from their communities and exploited. As we see now, immigrants are being
Hmm.
detained unjustly to be forced to work and be continue to be exploited. These are people who are vulnerable, that have been traumatized crossing the border, have been traumatized just surviving, just to provide to the kids, and
Hmm.
not being inflicting even more pain by just simply
Hmm.
existing and trying to provide a someone selling flowers, someone in the rooftop, someone selling tamales. Those are not criminals; those are our neighbors. And I think there's never been a time in our country that a president unleashes the military trying to snatch people that simply came here, like many people fleeing violence. So I think that in this moment and today's, with Indigenous Peoples Day, I think it's
Hmm.
important to reflect where we are and the genocide and the slavery that has been built, our country. In a moment like this, we really need to be standing up for values and principles of the world that we want our kids to
Hmm.
inherit, because this is cruelty, barbarism, and corruption that we cannot normalize.
Thank you so much, Alderman, for sharing the experiences, what you have seen personally, and also what your community members have been experiencing. And also as a timestamp reminder, it is Tuesday, October 13th, 7:39 p.m. And I'm very curious, why do you think President Trump is targeting Chicago and Portland? What seems to be his motivation with those two cities specifically? Why does he see it as a test run for what he is likely to do? I'm very curious for other folks that are not very familiar with the U.S. politics.
Yes, I think that what we see is a fixation on cities that are democratically run, that are actually, in this case of Chicago, for instance, built with a coalition of working people that elected, after 40 years, a black progressive mayor from the West Side. The last time was Mayor Harold Washington, that in fact delivered for the city of Chicago, former congressman, a mayor that beloved to this day in our community, because he gave the city a sanctuary city status to protect them from the Reagan administration. So when we see the history of our cities and these blue collar, hardworking people, that is, a coalition of working people, black, brown, white, Asian, young, old, all of us coming together to protect our city, it is a symbol of resistance, that in our country there are movements of people like the Chicago Teachers Union, a powerful force and union, asking labor to stand up, the UAW, the many people within labor, the Chicago Federation of Labor, right? We got faith leaders, working, working class community leaders, elected officials. So when you see that level of coalition fighting by corporations like Google, like we just had a powerful rally right outside of Google this last weekend, when we are making sure that we make the connections between the billionaires that profit from the dehumanization of people. The same drones that are flying in Gaza are flying in our streets. and neighbors not can tell them. Now they can tell that it's happening in our neighborhoods. So when we see a movement, a coalition of working people fighting back against the billionaire class, then it becomes inconvenient for the billionaire class. And we've been fighting Trump for a long time, and we've been fighting for by ourselves actually. Because remember, not too long ago, we also had to fight Mayor 1%, Mayor Rahm Emanuel. That continues to go into the national platform like he represents Chicago. So for anybody in the world who is watching us, Rahm Emanuel does not represent our city. He is part of the 1%. And what you're seeing in Chicago today is the many against the few. Is working people. Mayor Johnson is a former teacher that, from the West Side who is a working class. Uh, he's a working class black man who stood with us when they were trying to close our schools, when they were trying to close mental health clinics, when they were trying to destroy our public housing, when they were putting kids literally in the Ram administration. The thousands of young black kids who were interrogated and brutalized. So that is not, and the Laquan McDonald cover up, you know, and there's 50 schools that they close. So that is not the Chicago that we're talking about. The Chicago that we're talking about is the Chicago of solidarity, of the economies of solidarity, where neighborhoods help one another. And I think when you see that small businesses represent an alternative to the corporations that fund genocide and they fund these corrupt regimes, like Walmart, like Home Depot, the ones that actually cooperate with this regime, dehumanizing our community, and they see that there's a new economy of solidarity, a new government of working people.
Mhm.
And then you see, we were the city, for instance, that had the most number of visitors this summer. So people are seeing, right? And there's a city of contrast. We are also a city that fought segregation and with the Chicago boys coming. But this is a city also that have been seeing blueprints like Mayor Washington and the new coalition. The Trump administration sees us as a threat and the treating us as such because we represent an alternative to the neoliberal nightmare and to the fascist regimes and the violence that they want to impose in our neighborhoods and in our cities.
I am also wondering about your conversations or the city council's conversations with the Chicago Police Department in this because we're hearing about them, as you mentioned, getting tear gassed by the feds, by ICE agents. I am wondering about what is that communication like? What are they signaling to you and the communities? Because I think there's a lot of confusion right now about communities of asking why aren't this police stepping up? Why are they attacking the protesters? Illinois State Police, that is in this case. Um, what is happening with their line of communication? What are you seeing so far?
What I'm seeing is like a lot of pressures from within. Like you saw Superintendent Snelling going ahead and saying basically that basically validating the ICE version of the encounter with a woman, the 30-year-old woman that got shot at. When you look at the cameras, and I think this is a moment to be sober in our analysis of who is actually telling the truth and who's actually protecting our communities and those who are creating violence in our community. So when you see Superintendent Snelling coming and validating ICE version, only to later be seen with confronted by the facts, I hope is at the very minimum, a cautionary tale that we cannot just take the word of the federal government for granted. Number one. Number two, I think that is important that as in other cities like Portland and in Oregon, we're already seeing, and in fact, in Mississippi, just more recently, there was a sheriff who basically went public and said, look, if I see ICE agents coming here and terrorizing my communities and breaking the law, I will persecute them. And I think, yes,
Mhm.
if we have law and we're investing millions of dollars in law enforcement, I think that the very minimum is that there's a judicial warrant, that we already have a judge who ruled that. The question is when they break the law, which they did the following day. The following day in Chicago, when a judge already said you need judicial warrants, you need to identify yourselves. You cannot tear gas, you cannot use weapons of war. They did the exact same thing that they were told not
Mhm.
to do. So it's clear that they're defined because they want to send a message that they're bullies and that they will not stop until they get their way, because that's what bullies do. And I think that when we know that what's at stake is the future of our communities, we have to take a stance, and that's what we think labor leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, all of us coming and protecting our community. So
Mhm.
when we see a ferocious attack on our city, I think it's really what people have kept us safe. I think, like in other words, I think that the Chicago Police Department should hold accountable for what they're supposed to be. And the expectation should be we should not be kidnapped in our communities and nobody responds, right? When there's no judicial warrants. What happens when these mercenaries break the law, right?
Mhm.
There has to be accountability, and there are other cities that are already doing. I think that we, in this moment, again, in these systems of oppression, I think that what we've seen that has been effective is the people. And yes, as you mentioned, Chicago Police Department and our institutions should work for the people. But now we can see that for a long, long time, since they've been instituted, these institutions have served the billionaire class. They have served to protect capital, not to protect the people. So yes, now that we are in government, we should demand that these institutions protect people, not capital, not billionaires, and not oppression like that, and not breaking the law. So yes, the expectation from Chicagoans should be to demand that our public institutions do not cooperate. But further than that, that
Mhm.
when they break the law and they dehumanize Chicagoans in our streets and they commit crimes, that we should definitely
Mhm.
use all means necessary. The executive order that the mayor just did about not using property from the city like schools and park districts and so forth is important because lays the ground for legal action. But it's not enough. So in this moment, we need to come out. We need to come out in numbers in each block, in each. So and we got to continue protesting, civil disobedience, all by all means necessary, because the other side does not have a consciousness. And in our
Mhm.
law enforcement, as you know, in these issues of oppression, I think I would expect that we demand better from Governor Pritzker, from the mayor, that we actually holding these institutions to their mission of serve and protect. But we know that for a long time, these systems have been protecting the billionaire class and not working
Mhm.
people. So this is a defining moment to protect our residents in Chicago and across the state. And yes, at some point when the people is not enough and the military forces come, I think the government of the people, the governor, the mayor, the county president, all of us are standing together to protect the right or amendment or constitutional and human rights. And I think that we are in that moment. I think, like I said, my
Mhm.
pushback on the superintendent getting ahead before even an investigation is concluded. And there
Mhm.
should be an investigation. And I expect and I hope, and I leave with this, another was a long answer, that I hope that the woman who was shot at suits back and challenge what happened. And the more people, we know Alderperson Fuentes already sued the government money because she was detained by simply asking for a judicial order and was arrested. We see a priest who was shot at
Mhm.
Broadview for simply protesting also sue. And we also, have sued the federal government. We have a complaint that was used in courts. I sue personally and as a community with multiple occasions of how our community was targeted. Or evidence was like a huge pile, and the judge said that the federal government's evidence was as thin as a ham sandwich. So they got no evidence, and they're operating and they're occupying our city illegally. So we must fight by all means necessary. And yes, to your point, even when we have to enforce these executive orders on our state, on the constitutional and human rights, I think government got to do whatever is necessary to prevent us to be,
Mhm.
unfortunately,
Mhm.
victims of a state terror.
So with Governor Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson, are they signaling that they are going to do more to protect Chicago and the surrounding suburbs of Chicago? Have they looked to increase pressure on the law enforcement? Have they looked to find different openings where ICE cannot intrude on citizens? I'm very curious because there's a lot of criticism that both of them are getting in this time because they feel that in Governor Pritzker's case that he's not doing enough. He's allowing Illinois State Police to attack the Broadview protesters. And like, what has been the talk in city council been with other colleagues and in trying to um, push both the mayor and the governor to be on the same page and to really go further on what's going on right now.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. Let me start first with the city, and then I go to the state level, which is more my analysis. But instead of the at the city level, I think the mayor has issued a number of executive orders using his executive power to make sure that they don't use our facilities as parking lots, or that they don't collaborate, that we have zero collaboration. We also are about to hear in the next meeting on the community on the committee of immigrants and immigration and refugee rights. We're going to discuss at least several resolutions around prohibiting child endangerment by these agents that have left kids in the middle of the street in the name of public safety, ironically, around schools that use, no identifying themselves, basically defying the rule or the orders of the judges. So is our hope that more and more people, again, and at the state level, because we have seen not only in Chicago but in surrounding areas like Berwyn, Elgin, Waukegan, Aurora. So it's all over the state. So it is our hope. And again, today was the first time that Governor Pritzker has said that he will use law enforcement to enforce our local laws. And that, again, in other words, that he will arrest those agents that are defying the rule order, the judge orders, because that would be chaos.
Mhm.
If there's no real basis on how to detain somebody, they will detain any of us. In fact, the president already has said that they'll detain the president and the mayor and the governor. So I think that in this time, I think absolutely my opinion that there's got to be more. I think that what you mentioned in terms of state police arresting protesters or collaborating in any way, shape, or form is in this moment is a wave of collaboration that should not be normalized, neither accepted.
Mhm.
I was there in Broadview. We've been tear gassed on several occasions without provocation. Some of our volunteers have been arrested just for protesting, including a veteran. So we reject that. We reject attacks on our freedom of speech. We reject attacks on fundamental human rights. We see people that are being there for days with,
Mhm.
like, there's no kitchen, there's no shower, they cannot talk to their attorney. They're denied basic rights, even though at the same time, rights for Americans are very different. You can get your medicines, you can talk to them, they have an attorney, so you can see the dehumanization in real time. And I think that in that sense, it's good that we have now more and more people demanding that this facility is shut down, demanding that we cannot even inspect it. Federal officials even have been
Mhm.
denied entry.
Mhm.
Imagine the conditions. Imagine what they do in the plain side,
Mhm.
in the north side. And I think that's what I think has gotten the governor also to open his eyes that this is happening anywhere, and it could happen anywhere, and they would arrest anyone because they have no respect for anyone. So I think that it is important in this moment that the collaboration, coordination between the state and city. For instance, we have kids that are walking by themselves to school. That's how much terror there is. And in the school, we need to address the trauma that is being inflicted in these children. And
Mhm.
then we have a governor that has said, well, there's no money. I'm sorry. So you cannot continue to govern with a rhetoric of a Democratic governor by the tax code of the Republican Party when the millionaires don't pay, when the corporations don't pay. So he has to snap out of his circle of billionaires because he is a billionaire. And that's, I think, the defining line, and why he's always very critic of the mayor's administration and is not taking full accountability of how we're going to fund public transportation, how we're going to fund education, public education, how we're going to be less reliant on the federal government that now, uh, shamelessly, they just withheld even funding that was already secure to extend the red line to the south side of Chicago. Imagine the level of racism in about 50 years that has been fought for this project. So the black community in the South Side has access to public transportation. So they just withholding that, withholding $800 million for violence prevention programs, $200 million for substance abuse programs. But
Mhm.
yet talk about fentanyl, talk about public safety. It's such an embarrassment that I think it's important that we start talking more about the facts and how we coordinate state,
Mhm.
city, not only to enforce and maintain the humanity of one another, right? But also understand interconnections of the struggles, in Gaza and in our communities, so that we don't dehumanize anyone, right? The people's humanity is not should never be negotiated. And I
Mhm.
think that's why this is the moment. And again, and I mentioned this because the governor have not supported the ceasefire. And that has been another point of contention with the governor. So I think that in this moment in time, it is very important that we coordinate efforts to protect every constituent, as our constitution in the state says, and that we fund the gaps that the Trump administration is leaving to create chaos in our state.
Are there any cooperations with other blue cities like, I don't know, Milwaukee, Minneapolis? I'm very curious if there's any like coordinated like um stops like from other cities that are they currently being targeted or on the verge of having a Chicago experience. I'm very curious if you're seeing anything about that part.
Yes, no, I'll tell you that there's definitely been a lot of collaboration and we're learning from one another, right? And it's great to see, we had conversations with electeds in New York, in LA, in DC, community leaders, right? Labor leaders, learning from what they're doing, how they're resisting fascism. And I think that Chicago is the result of that cooperation, right? Learning of what they did in LA with the schools, snatching people from graduations, trying to instigate violence, I think that we also learned from DC and, the militarization, the deployment of the National Guard. In New York, the state of chaos, people going and being snatched from courtrooms, elected officials, I think over 70 elected officials and leaders getting arrested. So from civil disobedience to the deployment of veterans, right? A lot of veterans in DC challenging the administration, right? Demanding, and locally also we see a lot of veterans even in our community standing up for constitutional rights. That how we can
Mhm.
talk about America first, but then going back, values that veterans fought in World War II, right? When there was a fight against Nazi Germany, but now we see now that being played out in our streets, and now we label everybody who is against that a terrorist. I mean, so I see veterans challenging those narratives, challenging what really stand for, that they're condemning what's seen. So this coalition of people, I think, has to be intergenerational, intercity, interconnected. And I'm glad to see people that even in Tennessee, there's elected officials that are defying, Elon Musk plans for developments that don't leave the community. So this is, I think, a national fight. And I'm thinking, look, this is on October 18th. I think there's going to be a massive No King's Day. I think the Trump administration is already talking about, with concern, how many people is being activated, how many people within their own base are frustrated by the lies on the Epstein files, but losing food stamps, by losing just basic safety nets. So I think like more and more people are critical of the
Mhm.
Republican Party. I think that they are seeing that the discontent is real and is growing, and they're trying to respond to that with violence, with military
Mhm.
repression. And I think that this is the moment where we got to learn from each other. I think Chicago is resistant, but of course we need more leaders to step up in this moment.
Mhm.
It is good to see more labor leaders
Mhm.
nationally, trade leaders, and all of us. And it's going to take a big movement of working people to defeat this fascist regime. So we got to keep on building coalitions. I think in
Mhm.
Chicago, I haven't seen this level of unity in a long, long time.
Mhm.
I think it's
Yeah.
unprecedented, I'll tell you.
Yeah. For like the No Kings protest, but that also leads me to is Trump has been threatening the Insurrection Act martial law. Can you describe what that is and what happens? This is the worst case scenario we're talking here. What happens if he decides to go forth with that? What is Chicago going to experience, and um how does that leave politicians like elected officials like yourself trying to scramble as a response to this and along with community organizations and grassroots groups?
Well, I think worst possible scenario will mean that there's no rule of law anymore. That there's one individual dictating who is free and who's not, who is a threat of the state and who's not, who will detain anybody, as he said, that it will be money for military, like we're seeing right now, but there's no money for food stamps. There's no money for the government. The government, in fact, is shut down, and there's basically a military personal militia that will be deployed to follow Project 2025. And I think
Hmm.
people should be familiarized with what Project 2025 is and does, and is destruction of civil rights, destruction of our First Amendment rights. There will be a one-party system. There will be a dictator in our country. We already see the
Hmm.
consolidation of the judicial branch that shamelessly already said that racial profiling is legal, given that it fits the agenda of Project 2025.
Hmm.
That has a chilling effect in terms of like they can detain anybody just the way they look. And I think the martial law will mean that they will detain anybody for what they say or what they do.
I'm also very curious about big corporations, especially since there's plenty of them in Chicago. One example that comes to mind is Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft drivers in O'Hare Airport were also getting forcibly detained, uh, again by ICE agents for no apparent reason other than the fact that they're not white. And I am curious about what ways can city council pressure like big corporations to realize like this is going to be a losing hand for you. Like you had talked about like disrupting the billionaire class and that there would be no employees to do your work. And I'm curious, what does that look like right now in the landscape with like big corporate organizations that are either apolitical or actually just standing on the sidelines, just allowing this to happen in terms of their funding, in terms of support for this government.
Yeah, no, I think look, in this moment of tyranny, there's no neutrality, right? You're already with the side of the working people and the oppressed, or with the Nazi regime that is going to put people in concentration camps. I mean, we already see people missing. So I think it's very including children. So in this moment, I think that what what we need to what we need to fight for is, I'm sorry, I'm losing my track of thought. I'm a little so we don't chaos in our city if we allow the Trump regime to implement Project 2025. And what we're seeing in our country is the defying of the George orders, the defiance, right, and the consolidation of power. In a moment like this, it is critical that we again find our role in this movement and build coalition. We're not talking with 10 people that we didn't talk today. If we haven't talked with 20 people or 30 people or 40 people, that we're not talking to other people. We need to talk and build coalitions with people who perhaps, like we've seen people that even we think that they're following the MAGA propaganda, that are left without insurance, that are sick, that have cancer, that have been manipulated by this. So we need to talk and we need to build this level of coalition in a moment where tyranny where tyranny is the norm, resistance is a duty. And resistance can play in many forms. But what we cannot allow is this billionaire class to manipulate us and pitch us against each other. That's what they do so well. I think that in this moment, like Uber and Lyft, what level of cooperation they had in this raid? Because you cannot operate without a warrant. And if you went and you cooperated, like Home Depot and Walmart, right? What does it tell you about that corporation? What are their values? And that's what I think the power of the people, but the power of our wallets too, right? Because the Trump regime has no consciousness. So you cannot fight him with morality. We must fight him with our wallets and our presence, contesting with arguments and showing up in despite of the threat, the fear. When we overcome the fear, then the emperor has no clothes. And we see the fallacies and the lies and the corruption that, by the way, is impeachable. Bribes, treason, going against American citizens, not 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 swearing a congresswoman because they want to hide atrocities of sexual assault and the Epstein perversion, right?
Mhm.
I mean, in this moment in time, I think that's what in Chicago, we are also going to challenge these billionaires because we have our set of billionaires. That's what I mentioned. And we have the MAGA billionaires and we have the Democratic billionaires that they work for the same class, the billionaire class. So we need to, so in Chicago, like I said, we went to Google, we exposed one of the billionaires friends with Elon Musk, right? We are going to expose the billionaires that are behind this for-profit in prison industrial complex, right? And in this moment in history, right, I think it's like our numbers, our presence, fight them in the streets, in the courts, in the legislative bodies, and wherever we need to fight them. This is like billionaire class, understanding that the people united is fighting back to survive. This is a survival. This is the right to coexist. Chicago is showing that we can coexist,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, what can you share about your 25th ward? I know it's a vastly diverse community, just like the rest of Chicago is, but I would like for you to kind of share more insight about the 25th ward, and also if you could share like how many people have been detained in this ward, and what do you know so far from community responses the last few days there?
So the 25th ward, I tell you, I am extremely proud to represent a fighting working class community, like the solidarity, the rapid responders, right? Different groups doing rapid response, delivering food, right? Initiatives to adopt your street vendor, help, adopt your corner neighborhood, vendor, massive food drives, helping each other out so small businesses get supported, get promotion, help each other out in terms of like doing even, you know, people who have like media platforms coming, supporting our neighborhood, asking people to support. So a lot of grassroots, that I think is important to mention because it has built solidarity. It has built more unity. I think that this level of unity among our communities, La Villita, Pilsen, University Village, neighbors caring for one another, sharing meals, sharing each other, walking their kids to school, supporting each other, showing up, going to protests, going out there, to pass signs, to help inform, know your rights campaigns, and the rapid responders that going when there's a call vice presidents and going out and putting themselves on the line. So I'm very grateful for all the people doing the great work in Chicago. And I'm in a neighborhood where we're very much the port of entry of the city. The Southwest Side has been a port of entry of immigrants for generations. Like the Mexican community is the community that is the majority. The Mexican American community is the most humble, hardworking people that I know. There's just like hardworking people trying to make ends meet, putting the food in the table for us, for our families, literally, right? Like growing the food for us, serving the food, cleaning our places. It is hardworking people that I'm proud to represent. It's the honor of my lifetime. And that's what we fight so hard because these are communities. We're family here, and this is like La Villita and Pilsen, we're the heart of the Mexican American community in the whole Midwest. So we have a sense of pride. There has been, or the coalition to elect Mayor Washington was born in our neighborhood. There's a history of resistance here, and there's a history of coalition of working people that elected a mayor, Mayor Washington in the '80s, and now we have an opportunity to fight again with Mayor Johnson. And I think that in our, we're a neighborhood of working class people. And I think that we have fought to keep our schools open. We have fought to shut down coal plants. So there's a fight here. This is the heart of our community, and we fight, for all of us because we know that our constitutional rights are all at stake. And I think that Chicago has shown a lot of love for our community, and I feel that level of solidarity across Chicagoans. And I think more people across the country and across the world have to know what's happening in Chicago and the
Mhm.
dignity of the human being and the dignity of all people is being fought here in the streets by a lot of people.
Mhm. I truly appreciate this, and I really think this is very important to show the narrative of what's really happening in Chicago, but also that our community, Chicago, you know, is not a helpless community. We're a very tough community. And I think this is why I brought you on, because I know the work that you have been doing, and I know that our community has a lot of fight in us too. I think it's very important to know what we're up against. For those that have been detained in your ward, what do you know so far as their whereabouts, and what does that mean right now for them and their families at this moment?
Well, with people, we have at least a few of our community leaders that have been arrested for protesting and defending all of us. It's a hard thing, for like we go together, we come back together, so we've seen, we have had to spend, one whole day on a Friday, like until one of our leaders was released,
Mhm.
with no charges, but it was like kept with almost for a whole day. Another of our leader, a professor as well, both of them, um, also was, detained. She was kept overnight, now facing charges. And these are people who speak in truth to power, that are standing up for all of us, for all our rights. So I think, like, I will say that I hope that, people pressure Eileen Burke or Cook County State's attorney to drop all charges against all protesters that are fighting for all our constitutional rights and human rights. Also, it's important to denounce the level of threats that some of these leaders have received, death threats and all sorts of, targeting, doxing, one of our leaders was doxxed during his birthday, like just defaming him.
Mhm.
So it's like, this is a moment, of real solidarity and standing, you know, like for what's truth. What is really important is for us in this moment in history, to really stand up for human rights and constitutions for all. No negotiations. That's what we know, that the fight in Gaza for humanity and decolonization, it is so important for us here, also in Chicago. where indigenous lands are being also stolen. When slavery built a whole economy, and then the people who built and the foundation, the working people, the workers, are left behind as
Hmm.
disposable, by the ruling class. So the billionaires and that corporate the greed of corporations, the billionaires, is at the root of all the ills, the disrespect to Mother Earth, or the sacredcy of life. So I think this is a moment where I think I'm proud to be in Chicago. I am really, really humbled to be raising my family here,
Hmm.
and I'm glad that my family, we're all fighting, and we have beautiful neighbors and a beautiful community and a beautiful city and a beautiful state and a beautiful country. Americans are
Hmm.
courageous, and I think that we cannot allow a minority, a vocal minority, to come and dehumanize and brutalize everybody else. Our ancestors have been here for thousands of years. We're
Hmm.
Americans of the continent, right? And we should not be treated as foreigners or an enemy of the state when we are who work so hard to maintain our economies. These are hardworking people. People selling flowers in rooftops. Building hardworking
Hmm.
people. We have look. I want to mention one of my mentors. Right, this was a firefighter, a Mexican firefighter that went to Katrina when the Republicans created that disaster. We
Hmm.
have five Mexican firefighters, and we just had just another one where that Texan disaster, floating
Hmm.
kill, over 100 people, and but a disaster that could have been prevented if they have FEMA funds that they took to terrorize other communities.
Hmm.
And we had Mexican firefighters that came in from the border to help people in the humanitarian effort to save lives. So we got
Hmm.
to stand like who is saving lives, who stands up for the sacredcy of life and human rights and the dignity of the human being and constitutional rights, and those who are there for money and profit. Look at the bribery. I mean, Tom
Hmm.
Homan and the I mean, it's really embarrassing, to see what's happening. And I think this is a call for action. So I am in this moment, very humble to be able to work with so many wonderful leaders in our city fighting back. And I encourage everybody in whatever community,
Hmm.
don't let fear and terror, be the future for all
Hmm.
of us. There's
Yeah.
the world of humanity that we can fight for, all of us collectively.
The Illinois Coalition of Immigrant Refugee Rights, ICER, and immigration attorneys have obviously been in contact with your office and with the city. What have they been supplying you with information on right now? Because I think right now the Know Your Rights, even though I do, even though I do believe it's very important, ICE agents are going very rogue. They are just
Yep.
dismissing, you know, going into people's homes and just arresting people, both with U.S. citizenship, legalization status, and non-legalization status. What has that conversation been like to this point right now?
Well, I think like what we're telling our neighbors is like, our vulnerable neighbors, given, like you said, the level of lawlessness and disregard for even, you know, uh, court orders by federal judges. I think that is important that that's what we have been telling our neighbors: stay at home. We're building a network, just like in the pandemic. In fact, a lot of our neighbors refer this as a pandemic-style crisis, self-inflicted crisis, racist crisis. But nevertheless, that is keeping people home. People are missing school, hospital appointments. Even going to church because of what they're seeing, the level of intimidation. So in a moment like this, I think that our neighbors are connecting. They're connecting with one another. Our neighbors are are, um, are building neighbors of solidarity, where we need to, help our neighbors, get the kids to school. And it's sad, and it's painful to see kids
Mhm.
alone. I talked to a mom that was have like seven. There was like taking seven kids to school,
Mhm.
people who cannot, leave their home. But unfortunately, these are necessary precautions so that we don't put anyone at risk, right? So we're saying
Mhm.
yes, because of the level of lawlessness and shameful actions and disregard for the rule of law, it is better almost that we just tell people don't take any chances, right? At least in the
Mhm.
next few weeks. Also because as you know, the temporary restraining order is for 2 weeks, and our concern is that they are instigating, continue, as you saw, like tear gas just yesterday, right? More provocations, more violence. We saw the doxing against people who are like, who are being leaders in our community present no threat. So in this moment in time, we're telling people that we will continue to fight in every, like I said, going out and protesting civil disobedience, filing, filing lawsuits. By all means necessary, filing laws, by all times, rapid response and all, by all means necessary.
Mhm.
Reality is that these individuals, these masked individuals, have a level of hate that is evident in their actions, and that we don't want anyone, none of our neighbors, to be subject of victims of such dehumanization. Children to see such a dehumanization, the level of trauma that is purposeful to inflict the level of trauma to condemn an entire generation, and we must fight to protect those children and making sure that those children. And I think and I know that they listen to us and they see what we're doing, and they also see that we're fighting for them.
Mhm. In continuation of what you're sharing right now, I have I have observed that there's been different wards that are now issuing out whistles to neighbors to signal of an ICE presence and an abduction that is happening in real time. There have been um, on Facebook groups or on social media of rapid response on ICE and where they're being present at. And I think it's also very important to note that it's very important to like be very descriptive of the information rather than just say that they're there and then creating chaos and panic. I think I was wondering if you could share more about what communities are actually doing right now to form groups and to form ways to keep communities safe. I think this is very important for folks that are feeling very scared right now, but also as an opportunity for other cities and towns to be aware of what communities here are doing right now to combat this.
Yeah, so I think like what we made the biggest effect is in our own neighborhood, in our own block, like in our own community. So, be a parent, like as a parent, having maybe the same schedule, right? Being able to check in with school. Are there other parents that maybe need, accommodations? We're also being asked. We went to the last Board of Education asking for the remote, virtual option, from some families who for different reasons cannot do it. Volunteering your local pantry, your rapid response, so that we can help deliver food, right? Making sure that, like you said, in every ward, in every neighbor or neighborhood based organization, that we have a plan, of how we can help, and we can make, or be part of the rapid response, be one of those people who are part of the volunteers that adopt a block, or a corner block, right? When people come out from regular, or when there are community events and people are afraid to come out, they can volunteer. So there are many, many ways, locally at every level, that you can volunteer. There's so much need. Again, you may not even just organic things. We saw like, just today, a great group of volunteers who were saying, look, we're going to help street vendors, right? We're going to, do a little fundraising and help a few vendors so they can pay rent, or they have a little bit of assistance to pay for the groceries and so forth. So, there's many, many ways that, I think at the local level, checking in and making sure that aldermen are actually taking a stance. I mean, it's really shameful that 13 alder persons didn't sign on the letter to condemn what happened to Alderperson Fuentes, who was arrested by simply asking for
Mhm.
a judicial warrant. I mean, that's what I think we got to also draw the line, right? In terms of like, what are we really standing for, right? And I think, every local aldermanic office, and I'm glad to see, to your point, more of them, right?
Mhm.
Because at the beginning were not a lot of them, but now they see this is not only an immigrant community issue, this is everywhere, right? And every community, they did it in South Shore, they did it in Rogers Park, they did it in Humboldt Park, right?
Mhm.
They did it in Little Village. So they're doing it in the suburbs, in Berwyn and all that. So the interconnection. So now we're also talking, to your point, with other persons in Berwyn, in Aurora,
Mhm.
how we can coordinate legislative efforts, lawsuits, right? How do we find ways to connect with more legal resources, right? So there's volunteers. We have a coalition also. I would like to say that the Chicago United Families Coalition, and is a coalition where we have a legal volunteers, where we can try to connect people, because we see the gaps. ICER, OCAD, a lot of these organizations do a lot, and there's a lot just to monitor and document what's happening, and it's been an important effort to also document when they break the law. So we will hold them accountable. Those things will come out to the day of day. I mean, as you know, when dictators fall, things are going to be investigated. And I
Hmm.
think that this in this moment of time, I think the ISAR efforts, are fantastic in terms of the guidance and all your rights. And we also need to defend the rights because not
Hmm.
enough to know your rights. So now and hold them accountable, documenting, but also lawsuits, right? To your point,
Hmm.
when there's lawsuits, when we need to file legislation, so we have elected officials, faith leaders, community leaders, and then when we push back, so also how we can communicate to our communities, right, and inform them in a time of misinformation. So please check out the Chicago United Families Coalition, CUFC, right? There's where we are working together with the Muslim community, the Latino community, Christians, across faiths and interfaith. This is intergenerational. This is intercultural. This is intergenerational. This is all of us working people building a united, a strong front to dismantle fascism and fight back on this attack on our city, but also on our constitution and human rights. We must hold the line.
What can folks outside of Chicago do to support Chicago families? I know that you have alluded to it, specifically towards Chicago residents, but what can they consider, doing in terms of trying to aid in aid in the response to Chicago residents being harassed and with ICE, and also how can they help to support elected officials and community organizations here?
Yeah, I think like if people can support in terms of like supporting, I would say like or city, like if you in a way support of small businesses, support of our organizations, if you see efforts when you can volunteer your time or donate, this is the moment where we create systems of care, right? Because we have issues of food insecurity that
Mhm.
are created because of the federal government cutting those programs, billions of dollars in cuts. We also see the issues of communities that have lost medical care. 534,000 Illinoisans lost medical care. So there's a huge need. So connecting with community clinics, volunteering, we have a massive need of resources for rental assistance, you name it, right? So working, in your own communities, setting up a strong rapid response and advocacy groups in places like Berwyn, Sister, Aurora, Juliet, wherever there's also issues. And again, another thing that we're thinking is important is mobilizing for the common vision, right? Because there's also the role of government to provide, because there's so much that philanthropy and organic efforts can do when the need is so great, right? We have entire families suffering and our cities being suffocated, a state by the federal government withholding of funds. So, getting connected, to make sure that we mobilize at every level to advocate for government, to tax the rich, to tax the millionaires, tax these corporations like Uber, Lyft, and these corporators, try to tax, as we say, those corporations that are complicit, those billionaires, make them pay their fair share. There's a surcharge of 3.5% that Illinoisans already voted across the state, receive over 60% of support. That 3% surcharge of millionaires will generate $4.5 billion to the state. So we got to demand more, as you said, of the governor or people to say, look, tax the rich so that we don't become a target of the powerful and super rich. So this is the moment, again, if we can, like in your own community, in your own municipality, but there's many, calling your legislator is just as powerful. Calling your donation, your time, connecting with one another, connecting your
Mhm.
own neighborhood,
Mhm.
connecting between neighborhoods or cities, and build this network when we are fighting for the common vision of working people, that we pay, that we overtax, right? While the super rich don't want to pay and pay less. They just got the biggest subsidy from Trump in the history of our country, a
Mhm.
massive $1 trillion, break. They can pay, but we are being, we're being suffocated, and we cannot. We have businesses that have like cannot even money to pay rent or mortgages, right? So it is important that the rich and powerful, these corporations, these greedy corporations and billionaires pay the fair share. It's about time.
And a lighter question, or at least more of an individual question to you, is how are you taking care of yourself? Because you are a father of three of triplets, and I know Laureen has been very busy. I know she's a fighter. I mean, I've known her for several years. I know she has a lot of fight in her too. So I'm curious, like, how are you and the staff trying to take care of yourself, especially in this very unpredictable, violent time that we're going through right now?
Yeah, no, it's it's important, I think, to check with each other. I think that I am very fortunate to have a good support system with my family, Lorraine and the kids, and my extended family and our team, in the 25th ward, very caring people, very committed, dedicated people, and that we can have also fun, from time to time. We, just as as a few anecdotes, sometimes, from time to time, we get to talk and spend some time with people and just at the human level. So we saw Ramon Ayala, which is a big artist in Mexico, retire here his career. At 80 years old, he started it in Pilsen and wanted to finish it in Chicago, and he was so proud of showing his dual citizenship. It was a sold out show in all state, and we were able to give him like an honorary resolution and declaring Ramon Ayala Day in Chicago, September 12th. So I think that when we see the ability also to connect, to connect with our community, through events, through different ways. I mean, today we were talking with veterans. I mean, yesterday we were talking with veterans who came from DC and we're supporting this, and just and just having a conversation, being able to connect with people.
Hmm.
I just I think the sense of community really uplifts, and also sometimes some taking some time to yesterday, I went to watch the Bulls too with a group of veterans. So sometimes to time is important, and it made me very proud to see Chicago, at the best, and our very best, and the solidarity of people, and how many people greeted and say, look, we were fighting, So I just, I think. In this moment, I love sports, so I hope to get back to soccer soon. I kind of took a break, but I used to play, every weekend, but of course, with the kids right now, we just play with each other. But maybe looking into getting back to some of that. But it's been, like I said, the solidarity of people has been really uplifting, and very humble. Very
Hmm.
honored to be in Chicago, and in the struggle with Chicagoans, and a lot of people, great people, all over the country. I think yesterday we were also with Jolie, one of the influencers, a veteran influencer that came from DC, and wanted to come to Pilsen, and we ended up going to he went to see, well, I want to see a local bar, and we went to El Trebol, and there was a lot of people who recognized him, and it's just the level of solidarity. And he was talking about like I don't know what people hate or diversity when I love it, and he was just loving his modelo and having so it just gave us a little bit of hope in the middle of all their darkness. Just see each other's humanity and respect and love for one another. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
just having a drink can give a lot of perspective.
Yeah, and I just want to say by closing that thank you so much for being on my show at the last minute. I think last night I was doing laundry and I was like thinking, I'm trying to figure out who I could bring out because our local journalists are very busy and obviously we have seen what's going on with them. And so I was like, who else can I talk to? And I thought about your wife and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I can try to check in with Byron. And thank you so much for being on my show. Thank you so much for sharing so much insight as to what's going on in your ward and also throughout Chicago and what's happening and how Chicagoans are responding to this. And so I think this is very important for folks to hear this. And I hope and thank you for your work in the community. And I hope nothing but the best for you and 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 the community itself that's dealing with this.
Thank you. Likewise, I appreciate you. And sorry, I was a little tired, so I appreciate your
I
patience with this today.
appreciate it.